afternoon. You've asked me to do a presentation as though to your recruitment selection section about how to recruit and select Asian people. You've asked me to look at the difficulties the fire service may face trying to recruit Asian people. What I'd like to do is change the focus of the question in a subtle but extremely important way, because I think this also has bearing on how anyone goes about recruiting and selecting people. I'm going to show you why. If you bear with me, I'll give a brief excursion into the philosophy behind this initiative. Okay, this is basically a government policy and vision, if you like. The way it is that London is made up of people from a number of different cultures and indeed different countries, and the government believes they should all have a say in how things are run and be part of decision making. Equally, public services should reflect the public they serve. The people that deliver the service should be representative of the general public. However, if the public service doesn't reflect the public, then there may well be forms of discrimination operating in that service which are excluding those from other cultures or races. So, what the government has said is to institutions and public services is change your practices, become more open and inclusive of other races, of other cultures. The government want racial equality and an end to discrimination, and a fair and equal employer will have a proportion of each culture and each race equally reflected throughout the ranks. So, for example, in Lambeth, there's a fire brigade or a public service there should have, if it's representative of the population, a third of the workforce should be from ethnic minorities, because a third of the people that live in Lambeth are from ethnic minorities. That's the way it works. The government's saying we want you to be a fair and equal employer, public services, and therefore we want to see a representative proportion of different cultures and races in your workforce. See that it happens. That's your target. It then remains the responsibility of the individual service to make the changes within itself to address those things which are keeping people out or excluding people. They've got to change that to achieve the end result of fair representative workforce. So in a way, the fire service has to acknowledge, as well as other public services, that it's got it wrong, that it's not operating in the right way, and that for a number of different reasons, it's excluding people. And it's got to have that humility and a willingness to learn. The focus then falls on 2 points for the fire service, and the focus shifts from it being about the difficulties that Asian culture presents to the fire service, but more about internal problems. The fire service then needs to ask these questions. Firstly, what are we doing which excludes the Asian community? Which of our practices and our assumptions about people are excluding the Asian community? Secondly, how can we include and welcome Asian people? In order to address these, you have to know a little bit, quite a lot about the community that you're excluding or that isn't taking part for whatever reason in your service. Okay, here's a flip chart of it's a breakdown of the different Asian communities in London based on the 1991 census. The next census is due to come out by the end of summer 2003, should be out, and it may have a different emphasis and needs to be considered and updated, and this information will need to be updated. Okay, if you look at the main groups of Asian people in this country, they can be categorised into Indians, and who are Gujaratis, Indian Punjabis and Tamils, and about a third of them were born in this country. The other group of Asians are largely Pakistanis, the majority of whom are also Punjabi. Punjabi is an area in India. quite distinct characteristics of these two groups. Generally, Indians tend to be Hindus and Pakistanis are generally Muslims, and it's worth noting that there's a lot of tension sometimes between these two communities, because there's actually a dispute going on between India and Pakistan about Kashmir. So that's just to point out that Asians aren't just one group, that all are the same, although they are identified as such and they will share some common experiences. Here's another OHP, and this sort of briefly describes some of the characteristics of the groups. For example, Hindus have these kind of values, and that Muslim women sometimes may wear a headscarf and this sort of thing. However, I'd like to focus away from this. I'm showing an awareness of these issues. I'd like to bring the focus back out to quite a broad brush approach, because I think unless you're specifically targeting a Bangladeshi community or a Muslim community in a particular borough, then it's worth just looking at the approach, and certainly in this situation I think it's better to look at the approach. Okay, I think the general information that's important, why you've got all this, is that the target group that you're likely to want to recruit into the fire service are likely to be between 18, which is the limit for joining, the low limit, and I'd say 40, although I might be being ageist. They're quite likely to have been born in this country, and so the characteristics of this group is that they will have the general misinformation that the public have about firefighting, whether it's the general image, which is that it's big macho white men saving lives and sliding down poles, to put it flippantly, and also on top of the general sort of misinformation, there'll also be a sophisticated antenna for racism and a real cynicism about tokenism and about positive action exercises. So these are some of the key issues. But while this is your target group, it's always also worth remembering and noting that the Asian community generally tends to be based on consensus. Individualism is generally discouraged above community. So and things like what the neighbours think, what somebody down the road thinks in the Asian community is actually quite important. So in that way, the whole community from throughout the age groups influences decisions made by its younger members. Fitting in is extremely important, and for that reason it's important to reach the whole of the community then, as well as your target group, with some form of communication, so that firefighting becomes familiar as a concept and as a career, and also becomes less alien as something that Asian people might well do. So really there's two groups there. There's your target, very sophisticated target group, and you've also got a need to reach the general Asian community. Okay, coming into some of the other issues, also worth bearing in mind is that in Asian countries, firefighting is not very technical, largely. It's a low status and it's regarded a bit like a manual job. So there's a real need for education around firefighting in this country. The other very popular misconception is that it's dangerous or risky, it's all to do with fires and putting out fires. The other elements of the job aren't as well known. And in some ways, the gender issues around female firefighters, and particularly Asian firefighters, will be the same as the general public, the mainstream general public, which is that it's not something that women do, that you need to be really strong, and that it's a very male-dominated workforce, which is true. The other factor that will be present with Asian women considering, if they ever consider this role, is a fear of racism, of isolation, sexism, and also a fear of being set up to fail. Additionally, on top of this, there is the fact that firefighting as a career is not well known in the Asian community, so that will also influence whether or not Asian women will consider it. And so I think these are some of the problems and some of the difficulties or some of the needs that need to be addressed when trying to recruit from those communities. And I think the best way to actually counter these is to be imaginative. There is no formula, there is no right and wrong way, but there's an approach. To give you a flavour of the kind of things that could be done, is you could have work placements from schools, focusing on your target group, your target employment group, which is 18 to 14. You could have work placements in schools for 13, 14-year-olds, where you, in predominantly Asian areas, where you invite groups to come into the fire station to have a look and explain what the fire service is all about. You could also have training and emphasis. You could send information, give talks on the kind of training that basically with the message that if you have certain raw materials, then we will train you, that you think nothing of going into a very dangerous situation, and you'll know exactly what to do because that's what we'll provide you with. Another way of doing it would be to actually go into an Asian area and set up a training exercise, do mock fitness tests, invite people to come forward and go through a fitness test to see whether or not they could become a firefighter, to show what's required, and invite equally male and female applicants. These are kind of publicity exercises. And then there's more simple things, like for example, quite topical at the moment, is Diwali. Diwali is a Hindu festival which will take place later on this month. It's a great opportunity because Diwali is actually celebrated by Hindus, and if you're in a predominantly Hindu area, the fire service there could either give talks or publicity around fire safety, because Diwali is a festival of light. People use candles and fireworks, and so you've got two briefs met there. One is about raising safety standards, and the other one is actually showing the community that yes, we're aware of Asian festivals and we support them and we acknowledge them, which is a good relationship building up exercise. For other options, and this is by no means exhaustive, is to maybe the next time the Asian Dove Foundation, which is an Asian kind of a music group, puts on a gig, is to have something on the ticket which talks about the fire service, or some way of alerting that target group, that's your 18 to 40-year-olds, that the fire service is relevant to them and is keen that they know that they're reaching out to them. Overall, the key thing is to be imaginative, to know who your groups are and to be imaginative about reaching them. The key focus has really got to be about approach. And I think also, on a general theme, there's certain do's and don'ts about recruitment and selection, and I'll just go through a list really, and this isn't by no means exhaustive, but it's take time to get someone's name right. Don't be careful about copying up people's names. These are general courtesy issues. Spell names correctly. If you give someone a title and you're not sure whether of their name, then make sure it's the correct gender. If you're not familiar with the name, make sure you're giving the right, so you're not making a Mrs. into a Mr. Be clear about what's required at every stage of the procedure, about what's needed to become a firefighter, what the qualities are, what the procedures are, and make sure there's no mystery about how, what and why someone is selected. And if during your recruitment procedures, try to include Asian people on the recruitment panel. And overall, really scrutinise every contact you have with the Asian community, and don't be casual about it. Be very careful about how you deal with people. I think that's generally quite a good policy anyway. I just want to end with an anecdote really about how making assumptions can exclude, and it gives you a flavour of something. I mean, can I ask firstly, how many people here have been to public school? How many of you attended public school? Okay. Well, this was when I was attending a car maintenance course. I was a person there who had been a corporate lawyer and had actually come to a crisis at the age of 30, had come to a crisis about what he wanted to do, and had left work, much to the horror of his friends and family, had left work. Now I was talking to him about how he became a corporate lawyer, and he said he made a passing comment which was with the best of intentions, and he said, well, you know, if one goes to a good school, one is pushed into a career is suggested. And he said that to me and I was kind of aware of the fact that the school I went to was lucky to people were generally, if you left with an O-level, you were considered quite clever, and that I didn't get good careers advice. And it made me feel quite uncomfortable because he was assuming that I was the same as him and I had gone to a public school. He made another comment which was about cars, and he said, well, this is the problem if one buys a second-hand car. And the assumption there is that everyone had a choice about whether they had a new or used car. At the time, I couldn't have afforded a first car. So those two examples are about making assumptions. From his point of view, he wasn't aware of how I might see it. He thought I was the same as him and had come from the same place as him, but actually I hadn't. And it made me feel quite uncomfortable. If you amplify that experience by 100 times, then you might start to get at why the Asian community doesn't come to the fire service. But it's being aware of making assumptions that exclude people. That's the key point.